Figure skating is a complex sport with an absolutely massive rulebook, with over 400 pages in the US figure skating version alone, detailing exactly how a competition should be held, scored, and ultimately almost any detail you could possibly imagine. With such a comprehensive rulebook, it might surprise some to learn that there are even more rules to figure skating, some that never made it into any rulebook in the land. And today we'll be taking a look at exactly those, the unwritten rules of figure skating. Starting with our first unwritten rule, costume matters. How much the costume matters is one of the most hotly debated topics that I've seen within the sport of figure skating amongst its participants and fans alike. You could talk to a skater, a coach, and a judge and come up with 3 completely different interpretations about what the costume means and how much it contributes to the score. And if you're going by the rulebook's interpretation of it, the only thing the costume can really do is give you a deduction if you don't follow the rules. So, does the costume really matter? Oh yeah, absolutely. The costume matters. Probably not in the way people think, and at the higher levels, everybody is performing at a pretty high level where costume isn't going to be making up the difference in the scores in a very significant way. But at the lower levels, you see it all the time. Skaters can absolutely wear costumes that don't complement the fact that they're doing an athletic competition, and things can get lost in translation. Distracting things can take away from the skating, and the less you're relying on instant replay, the more significant it is to keep the judge's focus on your skating. And if your costume can even complement your lines, you might even show off a thing or two in a better light than it would have been otherwise. Yeah, you could argue that this is outside of the spirit of an athletic event, but I would argue right back you can see this in every one of the major sports in a different fashion. And really, it goes back to playing the game, making sure that every single little detail that you put out in front of the judges is picture perfect, and the costume is absolutely part of that. That isn't to say that bad costumes don't win, and skaters are guilty of costume faux pas all the time, but so long as your costume isn't distracting and drawing negative attention, you can get away with most personal styles so long as it isn't a detriment to selling your skating. Something that can be a tricky process filled with unwritten rules itself that we'll get to later in this video. One of the ways this has traditionally manifested itself was through the idea that maturity scores. You hear this one come up in the commentary all the time amongst the younger skaters coming up from junior and senior level events. Sometimes parts of this can be seen in the costume, but really the culprits are usually in music selection, choreography difficulty, and in their skating skills. This was especially prevalent in the 6.0 system where the presentation mark was the tiebreaker. Having fluidity between each of those elements and being able to sell them as a total package would help immensely with the maturity. One of the greatest examples of this of all time is Michelle Kwan's 1996 program, Salome. Understanding that he had a world-class athlete on his hands that was ready to compete for a world title right now, her coach, Frank Carroll, would remove her ponytail in favor of wearing her hair up and give her a downright biblical assignment in skating to Salome. Truthfully, it was a little bit more of a modern interpretation of Salome, more the femme fatale type, but it turned out to be the perfect way to communicate to the judges that this young skater had maturity beyond their years and they were capable of carrying on a performance that not many skaters could pull off regardless of age. You still see this reflected in the PCS mark in the IJS system these days. It's just that it's a lot easier to jump your way out of one of those situations than it used to be. The concept of maturity is certainly a complex one, and it has a very high degree of subjectivity to the way it decides what's mature within the context of figure skating. But the best starting point is definitely performance quality. They're looking for a completeness before, during, and after, and potentially even before the competition had even begun, because the judges are always watching. Long before the cameras were rolling, or the 5-minute warm-up had even started, the judges had been sussing this competition out all week by watching the skaters in practice and making their bets based on the mountain of evidence that they had collected throughout the week. That isn't to say that it doesn't matter what happens during showtime. That's the most important thing. But the performance that you put on in practice during the week is going to be the first impression that you leave and the starting point that the judges are going to have for the competition. If you want to be seen in the best light possible, it is in your best interest to win those practices. It runs even deeper than just what happens on the ice as well. They're watching what happens off the ice too. How you handle yourself and how you handle yourself with other people. They want to know that the skaters that they're sending on international assignments to represent the country aren't going to embarrass them and the program. And what that means can vary a lot from federation to federation, which brings us to our next very important unwritten rule. It's okay to be gay. Just don't tell anybody, show anybody, skate like it, or advertise it in any way. Now, this one may come as a surprise to some people, but once upon a time, there may have been a gay figure skater. I know. Shocking news indeed. This isn't one of those sports like baseball, football, or basketball where you just assume that all the participants are probably gay. No, this is figure skating, and we have a proper decorum for the way that we do things around here. Now, this is one of those unwritten rules where the political winds have shifted within certain federations, and it's not uncommon to have openly gay competitive figure skaters now. However, for over 40 years, there wasn't a single instance of a skater coming out while competitive until that point in time. And even notorious rule breakers like Johnny Weir would violate just about every unwritten rule except for this one. The one instance I was able to find of a skater coming out while competitive came in 1976 before the World Championships when a German tabloid outed John Curry before the event, to which John Curry replied,
"Well, duh."
There was a lot of speculation that this would hurt his marks, but in the end they didn't. He won the world championship handedly, as he was the best skater in the world at that time. But it was what happened after that spoke more volumes than anything. No figure skater would dare come out, no matter how pressed they were by the media. This is probably one of the most complex unwritten rules, and definitely one of the most politically driven ones. Ones that were often being supported by high-ranking judges and officials who happen to be gay themselves. You wouldn't want to be gay the wrong way, would you? Effectively adding a class divide element to it as well. And this is all before you get to any of the non-skating issues. These rules affected basically every male participant of the sport, regardless of orientation. And I would even argue it bred a new genre of skater who just went out there, landed jumps, and screamed, "I'm not gay!" for 4.5 minutes and got off the ice. So at the very least, I think this one had a few unintended consequences. In the more modern era, skaters like Eric Radford and Adam Rippon were able to represent their countries at the Olympics as openly gay athletes, but this has a lot to do with the federations that they were a part of and how the political winds within them had shifted so much over the years. But that's not the case for everybody, which brings us to our next rule: federation matters. There's probably no better example of this than what's going on with Mikhail Shidorov right now. A strong federation doesn't just mean better support for its skaters, it often means being seen in a better light amongst international judges who don't know you as well. Showing that Kazakhstan's federation can both give out and take L's in one of the greatest examples of this, when a sloppy Patrick Chan skate beat a brilliant Dennis Ten skate at the World Championship on the margins. It's one I definitely want to cover in the future on this channel because I have a bunch of crazy notes that I wrote down about it at the time that I just never used for anything. But it was one that stuck out to me for this particular rule because Yevgeny Plushenko immediately called out not what happened out on the ice, but the federation. And that was the true culprit of why the results were what they were. It's one we'll only ever be able to speculate on now, but having a relationship with the officials and the judges is part of what that federation does, and being able to sell their skater to them, which brings us to our next rule. You need to build a relationship with the judges. This is true for most skaters at almost every level of competition, from the lowest levels all the way to the highest. You need to get to know the judges, what they like, what they want, their personal sensibilities, and ultimately, how to extract those marks out of them. FaceTime with judges is really rare. You need to make the most on it and deliver on your promises, and they'll communicate back to you with the marks. I skated under the 6.0 system, so a mark like a 5.8 or a 5.9 was a world-class mark, meaning that you are good enough to compete with anybody in the world. The highest mark that I ever got was a 5.1, which means maybe it's time to consider coaching. It's really not that much different in the IJS system, except now those marks are being held in the grade of execution and the program component scores. If you're not getting the marks right there, the judges are telling you something very specific about what to work on. This can be especially tough for newcomers who have poor seating and therefore poor start orders within the competition, skating in early flights that may not be getting broadcast. And the best marks go out when the cameras are rolling. This unwritten rule is probably the one that's changed the most under IJS. You see comebacks happening all the time now in competition. 10, 15, 20 placements, as long as you can make the math work, you can come back no matter how big the deficit. Even so, there's definitely still a little score suppression within the earlier flights. But it was nothing like back in the 6.0 system where the math simply wouldn't allow a skater to come back, and as such, judges would judge accordingly. This meant not getting into the final flight was an absolute death sentence to your competition. It wasn't impossible to come back, but you would need the skate gods to come in big in your favor in order to turn the stones and even hope to land on the podium. It was even pretty difficult to move up warm-ups. If you were in the second warm-up, you usually got placed within the second warm-up, unless someone did something to skate their way out of a higher warm-up. And in the case of a really favored skater having a bad short program where they needed to make up the points, the math that was necessary to facilitate such a thing had a way of falling right into place. Even the final flight itself wasn't completely immune to this. The first skater was often known to be getting reserved marks, saved for the later skaters in case somebody skated better. That one I felt was always a little bit more overblown than it actually mattered. In general, the best skater of the event won the competition. And as Dick Button would often say, it wasn't the marks that the judges gave out that mattered, it was where they ranked them. All that being said, it's a huge advantage to skate later in the flight. Even today. It's not a surefire way to win, you still have to be the best skater out on the ice, but you have the added benefit of knowing what you need to do to win, and a crowd that's ready to see a climactic finish to the competition. These days, it's a written rule to have the higher seeded skaters skate later in the short program, and the higher ranked skaters after the short skate further back in the free skate. With all of this positioning for seeding happening before the competition even begins, it shouldn't be difficult to understand why the national champion gets national champion marks. This one could just as easily be called national inflation, a phenomenon that happens at basically every national level competition where certain skaters get even higher marks than they would normally get, in an effort to play politics before the next round of competition has even begun. And especially deep federations can even promote one skater as their national champion while having another skater that they know will score better under ISU competitions coming in as their second place finisher. This is effectively like them saying, hey, we have a world champion level skater and somebody who's better than that. This is a stark contrast to the way things were done in the past, especially in events like ice dance where there is a heavy amount of sandbagging the champions. One of the coaches who I worked with, Olympian ice dancer Russ Witherby, described it to me like this. If there was a national champion, they were your national champion until they decided to retire. Once they retired, then you could become the national champion. And this process would more or less work its way both up and down the ladder, all the way down to the regional level and all the way up to the world. Although it's a lot easier to jockey for positions before you get to the senior ranks than after it. You can certainly find examples of this in any of the disciplines in the sport, but ice dance without a doubt has the most of them, highlighting just how political the process of getting those monikers is and what it means to their federations. It's one of the reasons why image matters. The image a skater puts out is the first thing the audience sees, and for that reason, it's why federations have such a huge interest in controlling every aspect of it that they can. This certainly has varying degrees of success, but overall the results speak for themselves. There's a reason things like the Ice Princess archetype have stood the test of time. There's always going to be a new group of skaters willing to take the mantle, and it's a proven winner. I would caution people from thinking that being the Ice Princess is what made the winner though, but rather the implication that being able to pull off the role meant that hours and hours of work went into training that character off of the ice as well. It's something not everybody could pull off, but more importantly, most alternative styles didn't have anything in its place to compete with it competitively. Traditionally, the thing to do was load up on jumps, but the flaw in this approach was that the tiebreaker went to the second mark. These days, you can jump your way around this problem, but even then, too many sloppy landings will just hurt you on the GOE and you'll be right back where you started in the first place, with other skaters being able to skate easier programs and extracting more points in other areas in the competition. Coaching falls into this category as well, and honestly, it needs its own video because of how complex all of that is. But who's on the wall with you does matter, and if you dare make the process look bad, the unwritten rules will quickly become written ones. But really, all of this focus on image leads us to our final unwritten rule of this video. Show me the money. This is the one rule that's capable of undoing any one of these unwritten rules and every single one of these unwritten rules at the exact same time. It's going to dictate what federations care about, why, and when, as well as being the number one facilitator in acquiring the skills needed to win the competitions, although certainly it's not the only one. This works the other way around as well. If you're bringing in fans, and by extension of that, dollars to figure skating, the marks usually follow. But at the end of the day, there's no amount of money that can get a skater out of doing their job. You still got to get it done once the lights are on, the audience is in their seats, and the judges are watching. There's just no better shortcut to getting there than money. Alright everybody, those are my unwritten rules of figure skating, but you let me know, what are some unwritten rules of figure skating that you know? Did I leave any out? And which ones did you enjoy the most? Let me know in the comments below. Alright, I gotta get off the ice now, but I will talk to you once the ice dries.